Insulin resistance is one of the most common metabolic problems I see, but also the most misunderstood. And I'm asked about it all of the time. So in today's video, I'm going to be answering 10 of the most common questions I'm asked. Things like how to know if you have it, what blood tests show it, why it's so hard to lose weight when you're insulin resistant, why it often gets missed, and whether or not you can actually reverse it or just put it into remission. This is episode 5 of my Insulin Resistance Playbook series, and if you've been following along, this is going to tie everything together. And also, I'm going to timestamp every question we're answering today on the progress bar. So if there's one specific one you're looking for, you can jump ahead. But I do recommend watching the whole way through, and especially the last one, because if you're a woman, this is something that affects a lot of us, but no one explains it properly. But let's start with the most common question I get. How do you know if you're insulin resistant? The gold standard test for insulin resistance is HOMA-IR. This stands for Homeostatic Model Assessment of Insulin Resistance. A bit of a tongue twister, but that's not important. What this test does is it measures exactly how much insulin your body needs to keep your blood sugar where it's at. It uses two numbers, your fasting insulin and your fasting glucose. These two values are plugged into a formula, which tells us how hard your body is working to keep blood sugar normal. And the reason this matters so much is because insulin resistance starts years before your fasting blood sugar rises. Your body can compensate for a long time by producing more insulin. So glucose looks normal, but your insulin is already elevated. Now, unfortunately, HOMA-IR is not a routine test. Most doctors won't test your fasting insulin unless you ask for it. Sometimes they'll run it, but a lot of times you do have to pay out of pocket. But it really should be routine because it catches insulin resistance early, years before it progresses to prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. Now, another helpful marker if your doctor won't test your insulin is your triglyceride to HDL ratio. High triglycerides and low HDL are closely linked to insulin resistance. So if you have a recent cholesterol panel, you can do this calculation. When this ratio starts to rise, it's often a signal that metabolic health is declining. Now, one thing to know is that if you've already started making diet and lifestyle changes, if you're already reducing your carbs, you're snacking less, maybe you're doing a little bit of intermittent fasting, these numbers improve very quickly. So these markers, triglycerides and HDL, they're only really helpful if you're in the early stages of reversing it. And one last note before we move on, if you're calculating your ratio, you need to make sure you're using milligrams per deciliter. This doesn't work in millimoles per liter. And I get this question all the time. It's a ratio, it should be the same no matter what unit you're using. But it changes because the units we're using, triglycerides and HDL, they're different substances. So you have to multiply triglycerides by 89 and HDL by 39. Now there are also physical signs you can look out for that are very closely linked to insulin resistance. Things like visceral fat, almost always insulin resistance. Skin tags are caused by high insulin, and sugar cravings after eating. These symptoms are incredibly common, and that just goes to show how widespread and underdiagnosed insulin resistance is. Can you have normal blood sugar but still be insulin resistant? Yes, we slightly touched on this, but this is one of the biggest reasons why insulin resistance goes undiagnosed. Most routine tests only look at glucose, but insulin can be elevated 10 to 15 years before your blood sugar is high enough to be diagnosed as pre-diabetic. So many people will go to their doctor saying they're gaining weight, they can't lose weight, they're having these symptoms, they can't sleep well, skin tags, this and that. And their doctor will run their bloods and say everything looks normal. It's not normal. They're just not looking at insulin. What is a healthy fasting insulin level? Now, there's another part to this as well. A lot of the reference ranges when it does come to insulin are way too high. They're based off of population averages and not what's ideal. So sometimes people will tell me that they've had their insulin tested and it's normal, it's good. But when we actually look at the number, it's really not. You'll often see fasting insulin listed as normal anywhere from 5 to 20. But in my opinion, that upper range is far too high. Optimal fasting insulin is below 5. Below 8 is still good. But when it starts to creep up into the double digits, that is a red flag. Now, if your doctor won't run insulin or HOMA-IR, there is one company that has an at-home testing kit. It measures HOMA-IR, triglycerides, HDL, it measures your thyroid function, B12, and a few other key biomarkers of metabolic health. You collect your samples, send it back, and within a few days, your results are physician reviewed and you receive a report. And this report explains exactly what's going on with your bloods. So if your doctor won't run these tests, this is a good alternative. And I'll put the link to that in the description box down below. What causes insulin resistance? Insulin resistance develops when insulin is elevated frequently over a long period of time. The biggest drivers are things like constant snacking, diets that are very high in refined carbs, poor sleep, chronic stress, and a lack of muscle mass. Insulin isn't a bad hormone. We need it. But when insulin is elevated all day long, our cells stop responding to it properly. And that's what insulin resistance actually means. Your body produces more insulin to compensate, and the cycle continues. Now, there is a genetic component to insulin resistance. However, in either scenario, the genes still need to be turned on, and they're turned on by diet and lifestyle changes. So two people can eat an unhealthy diet, high in processed carbs, both have poor sleep. One might develop insulin resistance earlier than the other. However, if both people eat a healthy diet, get good sleep, do everything else correctly, neither will develop it. It's not something you can't avoid. It is caused by diet and lifestyle. And that should be good news because that means you can take control of your health. You can reverse it. What foods make insulin resistance worse? The biggest offenders tend to be foods that cause big spikes in our blood sugar and in turn our insulin. Examples include sugary drinks, refined grains, ultra-processed snack foods, sweet breakfast cereals. These digest very quickly. They cause our blood sugar to go up quickly, and then a lot of insulin is needed to bring your blood sugar back down. And over time, that repeated stimulation is what leads to insulin resistance. What foods help to reverse insulin resistance? Now, it's actually a lot more simple than you might think. In general, whole foods are the answer. Things that are high in protein, omega-3 rich foods, fermented foods, and whole, minimally processed fruits and vegetables. These foods naturally come packaged with things like fat and fiber that help slow down digestion. Slower digestion means less of a blood sugar spike and less insulin is needed all at once. Also, the less processing, the less refined, the slower it's absorbed in general. But food isn't the only piece to the puzzle. Hydration also matters. Electrolytes like sodium, potassium, and magnesium help to regulate nerve signaling, muscle function, and energy levels. And when people start improving their diet, especially when they reduce carbs or they start doing some form of intermittent fasting, they often lose electrolytes more quickly. And that's why hydration can matter just as much as food. If you've made these healthy changes and you're experiencing any of the signs of low electrolytes, frequent headaches, dizziness, muscle cramps, adding in a high-quality electrolyte supplement like the one from Sodi can help. Sodi contains sodium, potassium, and magnesium without the added sugar. So if you're improving your diet or experimenting with fasting, replacing electrolytes can make a big difference in how you feel. If you want to try them out, I'll put the link in the description box down below and use code HCK15 at checkout because that'll save you 15% off your order. Is intermittent fasting necessary for insulin resistance? The short answer is no, it's not necessary. However, it can be a very effective tool for some people. But for others, it can actually hinder progress, especially if you're overdoing it, which is one of the reasons why I do not recommend OMAD. Now I go much deeper into answering this in episode 3 of this series. I'll link that on the screen now. I explain who fasting works well for and who it's not the best approach for. So if you're curious, watch that video next. How long does it take to reverse insulin resistance? This really depends on how far it's progressed. If insulin resistance is caught early, when blood sugar is still normal, improvements can happen surprisingly quickly. Most people notice improvements within weeks. I already spoke about how your triglycerides can drop and your HDL increases almost immediately. But other signs, such as reduced cravings, improved energy, skin tags shrinking, fuller hair, clearer skin, these also show up for a lot of people very quickly. But if your insulin resistance has progressed to prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, it can take a little bit longer, often several months or maybe even years of being consistent. You don't become insulin resistant overnight. Like I said, it takes 10 to 15 years for insulin resistance to progress to prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. So you can't expect it to reverse overnight. But the good news is the body is incredibly adaptable. If you're type 2 diabetic, you're not a lost cause. It still can be reversed. It just might take a little bit more time. Which leads into question 10. Can insulin resistance actually be reversed? Yes. Insulin resistance is defined by a cluster of symptoms. In fact, it's closely related to what we call metabolic syndrome. Did you know that metabolic syndrome used to actually be called insulin resistance syndrome? That's because all of the hallmark signs of metabolic syndrome are caused by insulin resistance. High blood sugar, high blood pressure, a large waist circumference, aka a buildup of visceral fat, low HDL, and high triglycerides, which we already spoke about. And because insulin resistance is driven by diet and lifestyle, it can be reversed through diet and lifestyle. You can reverse all of the major symptoms of insulin resistance, aka metabolic syndrome. And as your insulin levels start to drop and your cells become more sensitive to insulin again, you're going to be able to tolerate carbohydrates better. Now, of course, if someone goes back to the same diet and lifestyle habits that got them to become insulin resistant in the first place, then yes, it will redevelop. But that doesn't mean it was never reversed. It just means the underlying drivers came back. And this is good news. You're not stuck with insulin resistance forever. There are changes you can make, and they don't have to be dramatic, that can improve insulin sensitivity and keep you insulin sensitive long term. Now, before we wrap up, I do have one bonus question I wanted to answer. Is PCOS caused by insulin resistance? PCOS stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is the #1 cause of female infertility. It's said to affect 1 in 10 women, but I do think that's a little bit low. PCOS is diagnosed based on symptoms. To be diagnosed, you have to have 2 out of the 3 main ones: high testosterone, irregular periods, and ovarian cysts. And once again, all 3 of these main symptoms are caused by high insulin. When insulin levels are chronically elevated, ovulation doesn't occur properly. This disrupts the hormonal balance. Normally, testosterone is converted into estrogen during ovulation, but if ovulation isn't happening at the right time, that testosterone doesn't convert, and that leaves you with high testosterone. This can contribute to other symptoms like acne and excess hair growth. And because ovulation isn't occurring consistently, cysts can develop on the ovaries. All 3 of the hallmark signs can be linked back to chronically high insulin. Now, it's important to note that sometimes PCOS gets misdiagnosed. Women can lose their periods for other reasons: undereating, excessive exercise, or stress. These aren't related to high insulin levels. But sometimes, just because someone has an irregular cycle, they get told they have PCOS. True PCOS is caused by high insulin levels. But that is good news because, again, this means it can be reversed. A lot of women are told it can't be, but there's research to show it can. Now, I can do a full video on PCOS specifically and how to reverse it if you want, so let me know if that's something you're interested in the comments down below. If you've made it this far, you're now fully equipped with the essentials to reverse insulin resistance. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend watching the entire Insulin Resistance Playbook series from the beginning, because each episode builds on the last. And if you have been following along with the series, let me know in the comments down below. Which episode did you find the most helpful? I'm curious to hear who's been watching from the start. Now, if you do want a little bit more guidance and support, if you have any additional questions, I do have a 7-day insulin resistance masterclass. This goes deeper into building meals, improving your metabolic health, and creating sustainable habits. It includes a sample meal plan and access to a private Facebook group where we can work together. You can find that linked down below. And again, if you feel like hydration is something that you're lacking, make sure to check out Sodi. That will be linked down below as well.